Early on in my tenure as editor of the magazine Piano Today, several friends with Juilliard affiliations told me that I had to meet Joseph Bloch. He was legendary, a living encyclopedia of piano history. So I phoned him and he invited me to visit, and thus began a long and incredibly rich friendship. By this point, a certain mystique had developed around him. One pianist informed me that a ritual was required to gain admission to his home. It involved stopping in a local deli and picking up a pastrami sandwich to deliver as an entrance fee. Years later, I shared that rumor with Jimmy. He had a good laugh over the absurdity of it. In the first place, there is no decent deli in Larchmont. Where would one go? And secondly, pastrami? This was a man better suited to caviar and haute cuisine. Of course, this was years before I discovered the philosophical ideal of pastrami, a kind of meta-pastrami, the purest form of what the phenomenologists would call true pastrami essence. You can only find it at Katz's Deli on Houston Street. The first time I brought David Dubal to Katz's, he took one bite and declared, "This is not pastrami, it's a work of art." I bring this up because Dubal and I had so many wonderful lunches with JM, particularly at the Harvard Club, which was always a thrill for us because we could only get in when Jimmy took us. And to add to the pleasure, since no money can change hands in that venerable institution, the meal automatically went on his tab. But when his 91st birthday came around, David and I decided to celebrate by bringing lunch to him. So I picked David up, we drove down to Katz's, and then delivered the revered pastrami along with potato knishes and Dr. Brown soda to Larchmont. JM's physical condition was a little fragile at this point. "This will probably kill you," I told him. "Yes," he said, "but what a way to go." He later reported that remarkably he suffered no indigestion at all that evening, which was unusual. A year earlier, B.C. Vermeersch of the Greenwich House Music School and I had taken him for his birthday to his favorite French restaurant in Rye, which seemed appropriate at the time, but I believe that the pastrami from Katz's had a more curative effect. We had lunch together every 3 or 4 weeks for the past several years. And there was always a little dance involved in selecting the date. "No one pays attention to me anymore," he'd complain. But then when I tried to pin him down to a specific day, he'd have trouble finding one. The truth is, most of the time, his social life was fuller than mine. Sadly, in the last year or so, these bookings were often with doctors. But we always managed to get together in one way or another, and he wanted me to collect as much gossip as possible for these occasions. I do the best I could, and after delivering the news, I'd pick his brain, which remained as sharp as ever till the end. At one of our last outings, I brought up questions I had about Beethoven's Hammerklavier Sonata. In his novel Point Counterpoint, Aldous Huxley cited Beethoven's String Quartet, Opus 130, as proof for the existence of God. My latest proof for the existence of God is the slow movement of the Hammerklavier. But it's an utter mystery in so many ways. "Of course, you know the name of the greatest interpreter of the Hammerklavier who ever lived," he asked. "No," I replied, perking up my ears. "Why, Philo Vance, of course," he announced. Philo Vance? But this was a pianist I had never heard of. It took some research, but I soon discovered that I had been had. Philo Vance was a fictional character in a series of detective books by S.S. Van Dyne, otherwise known as Willard Huntington Wright. Through the magic of the internet, I was able to find the relevant passage in a book called The Dragon Murder Case. Quote, "Although it was long past 3 in the morning when we arrived home, Vance seemed loath to go to bed. He sat down at the piano and played that melancholy, yet sublime and passionate third movement from Beethoven's Sonata, Opus 106. And I knew that not only was he troubled, but that some deep, unresolved intellectual problem had taken possession of his mind." Well, apparently, he must have been the greatest interpreter. Before going out to lunch, there was always the pre-meal ritual, which involved his beloved Lagavulin scotch. And yes, the fish crackers. Yeah. It was, as I wrote in my Wall Street Journal tribute, a drink reflective of the best qualities in the man. Thanks to Jimmy, I learned that Lagavulin is no ordinary scotch, but something special, highly cultivated, singular, and awe-inspiring. For those of you who read my Wall Street Journal article, I apologize, I'm going to repeat some of the material. Everyone called him Jim or Jimmy, though he was actually named Joseph Jr., a fact that couldn't be allowed to stand since it robbed him of his individuality. He was, of course, no junior version of anything. He had been everywhere, knew everyone, and he had the anecdotes to prove it. His exploits all had the patina of high romance. While a young man traveling throughout Europe, he was taught how to play the card game Hearts by actress Marlene Dietrich in silk pajamas as the two passed the time on an overnight train. While touring the world, he performed in Iran and found that his piano was mysteriously draped in cloth. It turned out to be an upright pretending to be a grand. The concert went well, nevertheless, but afterward, one audience member approached him to ask, "Next time, would you play something we like?" "What would that be?" asked JM. "The theme from Dr. Zhivago," came the reply. While touring the Far East, he traveled to Borneo and unexpectedly ended up performing in a leper colony. In Sendai, Japan, where the temperature in the concert hall was below freezing, he soaked his hands in a bowl of hot water between each piece. But he learned early on to tolerate discomfort with equanimity. There was, for example, that fraught relationship with pianist Willie Capel. Both men had been piano students of Olga Samarov, whose real name was Lucy Hickenlooper. She paired them, JM told me, so that they could each benefit from the other's qualities. Jim was the Apollonian pianist, of course, and Capel the Dionysian. But Capel took every opportunity to belittle his colleague. On one occasion, he followed a performance given by JM with his own rendition of the same piece, just to prove he could do it better. This prepared Jim for his classes at Juilliard. In a now legendary interaction, the pianist Paul Jacobs, accomplished and supercilious even as a student, listened to Jimmy demonstrate an early keyboard work and responded to the question, "Can anyone tell me what was unusual about this piece?" with the remark, "For one thing, you're pedaling."